What's up? Alrighty. Okay. How's everybody doing? Welcome to Burn It Down with Kim Brown, the Tuesday edition. Glad to see everyone's smiling face up in the place. Listen, if you don't know what Burn It Down is, let me tell you really quickly. This is the program where we set ablaze all the systems, all the politicians, all the negative things that seek to keep people of color, Black and brown people, women, gay people, trans people down. If there's anything that discriminates or has a boot on the neck of any of those above groups, we are here to set flames to that shit. So that's what Burning Down is all about. What I need from you, okay? Appreciate your likes and your subscriptions, but I need you to go to the other channel. Burn It Down with Kim Brown. We have our own YouTube channel over there. You guys have been kicking ass. We are surpassed 500 subscribers already in a very short amount of time. So that is all because of y'all. So thank y'all, the customers. We appreciate you very much. Listen, today's program is titled, Was Andrés Guardado the target of a police gang initiation? And if you've been watching Burn It Down, even our predecessor to Burn It Down, Stir Crazy, you know that we've been covering that case of the 18-year-old security guard working in Compton, California, ended up with 5 bullets in his back from allegedly the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And then the situation has gone completely left. We heard from the whistleblower over the summer who claimed that Andrés was killed as part of a police gang initiation. Well, there has been additional developments with this story. We're going to get updated and catch you all the way up on that. Listen, y'all, cops are leaving the country. Cops are pleading the fifth. It is very uncertain right now whether or not any justice will be served for Andrés' family. So we're going to get updated on that very shortly. And for reasons why the police should be defunded. Well, like I said, look no further than the case of Andrés Guardado right there. But in Seattle, Washington, the Seattle City Council voted to defund the police. No, like seriously, by 20%. And this is a significant amount. At the same time, activists are not necessarily claiming victory because they were seeking a 50% cut to the Seattle police budget. And I'm very excited to be joined coming up a little later in the show with Seattle City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant. She's going to join us and tell us why she voted against the 20% cut to defund the police, which to me is amazing. Trust me, if you told people in Baltimore, Maryland right now that the Baltimore Police Department was going to get their budget cut by 20%, people would start dancing in the streets. But Seattle says that's not good enough. And I respect that, to be quite honest. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But like I said at the top of the program, the case of 18-year-old Andrés Guardado, who tragically was shot in the back by Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officers. And Dwayne, if we could, I want us to go to, I believe it was V1, where in the immediate aftermath of the shooting of Mr. Guardado, journalist Memo Torres was on the scene and interviewing the store owner of the shop where Andrés was working at the time he was killed by cops. Let's take a look at that video if we could. This is from June.
He was standing right there at that curb where the fire hydrant is, and he was talking to two girls, and then the police approached him and right away drew their guns, pointed them at him, and he got scared and he ran in here. And then he ended up getting on his knees with his hands behind his head, and then the cop shot him 7 times.
That is just a horrifying account there by, I believe it is the shop owner where Andrés was working security. And in the days following, you know, the community took to the streets to protest the murder of this young man. And they, in turn, were met by more violence from Los Angeles police departments out there. Dwayne, let's take a look at V2 if we could.
Demonstrators face off with deputies in Compton as a peaceful protest takes a violent turn.
They opened fire and they started throwing rubber shots at people. People were protesting peacefully. They decided to attack them and drop a bomb on them and also tear gas.
protesters capturing the chaos on camera. The trouble began when deputies fired pepper balls at several protesters, demonstrators then taking aim with water bottles and debris.
And then all of a sudden we hear shots coming out, people started running in different directions, but they made a huge mistake because let's not forget the whole world knows Compton.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it?
The peaceful protest began at the scene of Thursday's deadly deputy-involved shooting. Authorities say Andrés Guardado pulled out a gun when confronted by deputies. The 18-year-old shot 6 times.
When will the violence end? It's who's next? Am I next?
Guardado's family says he was shot in the back as he ran from deputies and are insisting he did not own a gun. His father joining today's march to demand justice and an end to police brutality.
I say thank you everybody for coming here. You know, I feel very bad to talk, you know, because I don't feeling really good, you know.
Those turning out today say the 18-year-old's death is just the latest in a long history of lives lost at the hands of law enforcement.
Maybe now everyone can see that new training is required and that defund the police really means let's create an organization that is really for peace.
That video there, courtesy of ABC7 out in Los Angeles. We are joined today with journalist Memo Torres. Memo, I appreciate you being here because you have been following this case really since it happened back in June. 6 months ago now, Andrés was murdered. First of all, thank you so much for making the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure, and I'm glad to talk about this, and I'm glad you're bringing light to this issue.
Okay, so to ask you what has changed in 6 months, I think is probably an extremely loaded question because a lot has changed. Some of the accounting that we heard in that video there from ABC7, some of that has been debunked. I don't believe police ever found a gun on Andrés. And well, let's just start there. What is the status of the investigation now as it stands?
You showed earlier the clip I had of Andrew Haney. He was actually the shop manager. He wasn't the shop owner. A lot of people get that confused, but he's been gone missing. He's one of the main witnesses, and nobody can track him down. The police or the lawyers, or the coroner's office haven't been able to find him. Currently, what we just had last week was one of the first inquest in 40 years. It's an inquest that was called by the coroner, which is similar to a trial, except they're not looking for fault. They're looking for evidence. They're trying to find facts as to what exactly happened that moment up to Andrés Guardado's being killed and shot in the back. And that inquest, I was there. I because I took that video and spoke to Andrew Haney, I was there for that inquest to testify that I did speak with Andrew Haney and that I did take that video so they could submit that as evidence. And that inquest was crazy. I think Miguel Vega, the deputy Miguel Vega, and Chris Hernandez, who were the deputies on site. Miguel Vega was the deputy who shot Andrés Guardado in the back. He was out of the country, so he didn't present himself. He was going to submit a declaration where he claimed he invoked the Fifth. Chris Hernandez, the other deputy, his partner, was there at the scene, also invoked the Fifth. And that's kind of expected, but what was even crazier is that the investigators that were on site, Mike Davis and Joseph Valencia, also invoked the Fifth. They refused to answer any questions about their investigation, even as to what their duties were, who assigned them, how long they've been in the force. I mean, they refused to answer any questions, and that was just mind-blowing. I think that was the biggest bombshell of the inquest so far. But that's where we're at.
Bear repeating. The witness whom you interviewed, the witness to the murder of Andrés Guardado, the manager of the store, is not able to be found right now. He has disappeared. Is that right?
Yeah, he can't be located. Nobody knows what happened to him. He might be hiding. That's what we hope. We don't know. I mean, they can't locate him.
That's troubling. Also, The fact that the police officers who allegedly were the ones shooting Andrés and who were present on the scene have also pled the Fifth, which is, I guess, not surprising, but disturbing nonetheless. And we have some video of that. Dwayne, can we key up the video of the officers invoking their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, because why else would you invoke the Fifth unless you were fucking guilty? But let's take a look at that if we could, Dwayne.
Pursuant to the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, not to answer any questions at this time.
Detective Valencia, can you tell us what documents, if any, you reviewed in your preparation for your testimony today?
Could you repeat that, please?
Yes. Can you please tell us what documents, if any, you reviewed in preparation for your testimony here today?
Based on advice of my counsel, I am currently invoking my rights pursuant to the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution and not to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Detective Valencia. Is it your intention to claim the privilege against self-incrimination to all the remaining questions on the topic of your occupation?
So, Memo, are these officers who were on the scene and involved in Andres's murder, I would assume that they're all not on the street currently. They're probably on some sort of administrative leave at this point.
No, they're on the street. They're at work. The officer you just showed was actually the investigator, Mike Davis, who was on the site invoking the Fifth. He's the detective who's supposed to gather the evidence and supposed to, give the evidence over to this inquest, which is trippy because nobody was accusing him of being at fault of anything. And then for him to just say, I plead the Fifth, I'm not going to answer any questions about the investigation, was just like, what the fuck just happened? The deputies didn't even show up to court. One of them's out of town. He's on vacation. But they're still working. They don't have behind desk jobs. They're still assigned. I mean, the sheriff does a very good job of protecting his deputies. And he has a tight grip on all the evidence. So, I mean, the reason the inquest happened, the coroner called this inquest, and the last one was 40 years ago, was because even the coroner saw that something was up. I mean, this wasn't right. I mean, they had a second coroner look into it. He confirmed that it was a homicide, that Andrés Guardado was shot in the back, and they showed the bullet wounds. They showed that one was downward from the middle of his sternum towards his front, which indicated that he was possibly on his knees. And the other 4 were upward, which means he was already falling or on the ground when they shot him. And he had 2 other abrasions. There were 7 shots total, 5 hit. But yeah, that's crazy.
It's stunning. Just the level of protection that police are afforded when they murder an unarmed citizen or a non-citizen, just an unarmed person out here in the streets, basically just doing his job. And the other part of this heartbreaking story has to do with the fact that at least one of these officers has been accused of trying to use perhaps Andres's murder as a method of gaining entry into a Los Angeles Sheriff's Department gang called the Executioners. Some news broke months ago by Spectrum News', I believe it's Kate Cagle, released some deposition video that I want us to take a look at. We have been following this story for several months. And when this part about it came out, I was also floored by this as well. Let's check out some of that whistleblower testimony, Dwayne.
How about this latest shooting of Andrés Guardado? Was that done by an inked member or a prospect of the Executioners?
Prospects.
And who was that prospect? You know?
Lacks foundation. Speculation and conjecture on the part of the witness.
Deputy Vega and Deputy Hernandez. And again, this is common knowledge where they'll say they see a person running with a gun, but then there's never a gun recovered. But then, there's also, in order to apprehend that suspect, there's force involved.
Memo, let me get your take on that, because Deputy Vega is the one who has left the country. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Deputy Vega is the one that left the country. It's interesting that Art Gonzalez was saying that, they do chase these people down, they run them down, and then say they have a gun. Deputy Miguel Vega has actually been disciplined before for falsifying statements and planting evidence. That's documented too. So you have this history with Miguel Vega already doing these kind of shady things in the neighborhood. And then finding out that he wanted to join the deputy gang, the Executioners, which is just one of many deputy gangs that LA is infested with, is not surprising, I guess, to say. I mean, we all kind of suspected it. I mean, but to hear that is just it's heartbreaking. Like that they'd rather join a gang, a deputy gang, and murder an 18-year-old kid while he's running away and shoot him in the back for that.
Memo, there's a lot to unpack out of that. I wanted to ask, how do this proliferation of these police gangs, how does that influence the way that they police in the communities that they police?
Well, they're gangs in every sense of the word. I mean, I don't use that word lightly. In the different publication. I mean, on my Twitter, I have a whole deep dive into different articles about them. They have initiations, which is the executioners. They're called executioners for a reason. I mean, Miguel Vega was trying to execute Andrés Guardado. They basically take over different deputy stations. Like you have the Banditos in East LA, and they take a stranglehold on the community. They will work with certain gangs. They will fight other gangs with gangs. We had the whole, it goes back to the Rampart scandal in LA with the crash unit, and then them teaming up with Suge Knight and, fighting the 18th Street to try to get control of like neighborhood drug trafficking and make money off of that. I mean, this is something that's been documented historically, and they cause trouble. They even have historically fought each other. And these deputy gangs have evolved from the jail system because the sheriffs control the jails. So, you had like the 3,000 block boys, the 2,000 block boys, and now you have like the Vikings, the Little Devils, the regulators, they see themselves as like cowboys, basically, like this is a real thing, and they terrorize neighborhoods. They do. They go out there and they feel like they own the neighborhoods. And you will hear from people in the community talk about how they literally just terrorize people. You had the case with, what was his name? Dalvin Price in Compton. Dalvin Price recently got beat up by one of these police. I mean, just doing nothing. He was just walking down the street. And that was videotaped. And then the Compton City Hall had to go and get the deputies out there, and they had to like do a whole press about it and get the community out there. And it's, there's just so many details. You recently had the sheriffs down in South LA shoot Dijon Kesey, who was on his bike, and he was running down the street. He was using his bike, and according to sheriffs, they were going to pull him over for a traffic infraction. I guess he didn't make a stop while riding his bike. He saw the police, he ran, the same thing as Andrés Guardado, shot him in the back. They recovered a gun, according to them. That was another incident. So, deputy gangs here and the sheriff's deputies have little accountability. They have zero trust from the community, and they literally just terrorize communities at this point.
Have you been in touch with Andrés, his family? And if so, how are they doing? What has been their response to all of this? I was talking to a friend about this case, and my friend wondered aloud, whether or not Andrés or his family perhaps were undocumented, and perhaps that is part of the reason why this investigation has, just been a farce, really, from the outset, with police now taking the fifth. The main officer who is perhaps implicated has left the country with no intents to return. Have you spoken with his family? And if so, what have they said about these latest developments?
I don't have any contact with the family. I had approached them initially when I was taking the video and they were there, but they had been so exhausted of talking to people and just emotionally distraught that I never got a chance to get their information. So I haven't spoken with them myself. I do know other activists and people and lawyers that do speak with them, but I don't know how they're feeling about it right now. I imagine they're, angry about the whole situation, to say the least. But what was your other question? I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I'm just curious about. I mean, I can't even say how was the community taking this because the list of names of police violence and brutality that you just listed off. Tragically, Compton, East LA are very much accustomed to police. I can't even say they're acting rogue because this is how they act, right? They act like gangsters. They act like they do not have any adherence whatsoever to the Constitution or to people's civil rights. How is this summer, from your perspective, has this summer changed anything? Has it changed the attitudes of people on the ground? I mean, we know that the Block Garcetti protests have been happening daily now for almost 2 weeks, with activists showing up at Eric Garcetti's house, the mayor of Los Angeles, steady. Has there been a shift in the way Los Angelenos are approaching the defund/abolish the police movement?
I think there has been. I think if anything, the police have started showing their colors more. I mean, these are things that like the deputy gangs is something that's been documented for a long time, but people don't really, I don't know why it's never gone traction or people really paid attention to it. Maybe because they don't believe it happens because, you have it in concentrated neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods are like Compton, East LA, and they're not happening in like Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, Culver City. But now you're starting to see like, a lot of people from these neighborhoods starting to come out too, like West Hollywood. I mean, all over Hollywood, even the Valley, like all these areas in LA, you start seeing more people coming out, which traditionally you don't see them getting involved with any protests. So you do see a lot more faces out there. You do see a lot of more community action, a lot more demands. And the story of the Andrés Guardado case is like, it's almost like a can of worms and they're slowly just crawling out of the can and people are starting to pay attention and like, with this inquest and investigators pleading the fifth, everybody's like, okay, what is going on? What really is going on? And I speak to people, they find out about deputy gangs and they're like, wait, what? Deputy gangs? Is this a real thing? And it is, it's a real thing. And people don't believe it. And it's something that's like out of a movie. It's hard to believe, but it's happening. And I think with everything going on this year, with all the different shootings from police and the police brutality during the protests, people are starting to see their true colors, and people are starting to understand what defund the police means and why people are so mad at police.
Villanueva is the Los Angeles County Sheriff. Is that right?
Yeah, Alex Villanueva.
So, and pardon me for my lack of recall on this. I thought I read this on Twitter where he received some sort of request from Congresswoman Maxine Waters that he declined. He said he was not going to do it. Perhaps you don't know what I'm talking about. And maybe I should have my tweet ready to go. It was just a lot going on today. But does there seem to be any sense of accountability from people higher than Villanueva? I'm not sure if Garcetti is interested in this, or Gavin Newsom, the mayor of California, or even members of Congress in clearly addressing perhaps from a higher level than just the surface level LA Sheriff's Department and Los Angeles Police Department about doing something about this. I mean, the community is clearly being terrorized. People are being murdered without accountability. Are congresspeople and other elected officials being somewhat receptive to this and demanding more in terms of accountability?
Working my way from the top down, like I have not heard Gavin Newsom say anything. I have not heard our mayor Garcetti say anything about this case or any other cases. I haven't heard much from different council members, haven't really said anything. The only ones that have kind of spoken out are the county board of supervisors. They've been in hot contention with Alex Sheriff Villanueva because Alex Sheriff Villanueva works directly with the county board of supervisors. You have people like Michael Riley Thomas, who sits on the board, who's been in hot contention, like literally having Twitter fights with Villanueva about transparency, about body cams. Villanueva has one of his biggest campaign issues when Sheriff Villanueva was elected was that he was going to have body cams on all his deputies because the sheriffs don't have body cams. And since then, he's had very few. He just got a few body cams to a couple departments. And that seemed to only happen because of the Andrés Guardado case. And that brought those issues up. But he keeps blaming the county board of supervisors for their lack of movement and funding. They keep telling him that he's got the money, he needs to do it. So the only people I really see fighting with Villanueva is the county board of supervisors. They actually just proposed a motion to try to have him removed. Now, if they actually have any power to do that, I don't know that. And that's one of the things that people are questioning. But other than the county board of supervisor, you have Maxine Waters, Representative Maxine Waters, Auntie Maxine, that everybody loves her down here. She's called for the Department of Justice, for both California and the federal Department of Justice, to look into this case. Now, she doesn't really have the power to ask them and assign them, but she's kind of made the call. Other than that, there still hasn't been any real accountability. We're hoping that maybe George Gasson, the new DA, will look into this. But because the investigation, as Alex Villanueva always loves to say, is ongoing, we don't know how that's going to go, how long that's going to go. He's hiding evidence. So it's hard to see how anybody could start a case if Villanueva's hiding everything and has everything on lockdown.
You know, you mentioned the new district attorney there in Los Angeles County. If we could, Dwayne, can you pull up T4 for me, please? Because today was his first day on the job. George Gasson has announced today in Los Angeles that he intends to end cash bail, the death penalty, gang enhancements, solitary confinement, trying youth as adults, criminalization of homelessness and mental health, and he will also review and reopen police use of force cases. This was published in a tweet from the Youth Justice Coalition out there in Los Angeles. They are celebrating this as perhaps a victory, Memo, but we were talking beforehand that, you know, people do get into elected positions and they tend to overpromise and sometimes underdeliver. Let me get your take about District Attorney Gasson. What do we know about him?
I mean, we know that he was a district attorney up in San Francisco and he did some things up there. We do know that he used to be LAPD for a long time. He worked his way up. He started in the Hollywood division and he worked his way up to assistant chief. We know that he has experience as a DA. What we don't know is if he's going to come through on those promises. You know, like I said, all these officials here in LA love to talk. They all love to promise, and none of them like to deliver. So, you know, let's see if he can walk that talk.
I mean, but hold on. I mean, he was hitting them with some crucial talking points there. You know, ending cash bail, ending solitary confinement. You know, not trying youth as adults. You know, not criminalizing homelessness and mental health. You know, that's a huge thing happening in California right now, where the homelessness crisis is not only exploding, but people who are forced to sleep out in the streets are being criminalized, and people who are even sleeping in their cars are being criminalized. If he is able to follow through on these promises, I mean, what type of difference or impact do you think that could make in the community, but especially with the way the criminal justice system operates in Los Angeles County as of now?
Well, hopefully it steers youth away from the jails, you know, and it stops criminalizing youth for petty things like, you know, acts of poverty, you know, crimes of poverty, you know, they like to use that term. Hopefully it does that. Hopefully it brings some trust back into the DA's office. Ultimately, the one question he hasn't really addressed is, and the one that the LA community has been pounding on, is if he's going to if he's going to bring justice to these murdering cops. You know, if he's going to go after them or not. That's always difficult because the DA relies on the police and the sheriffs. They have to work closely together with evidence on these criminal trials. So it's a difficult position for a DA to come out and say to police that he wants them to reform the police department, but he also wants to have their trust and work with them. You know, that I believe has to come from another level. That there has to be somebody else that comes after police. I don't think the DA can do that effectively, honestly. But you know, hopefully on his end, if he comes through on all those things, I mean, that's a win. You know, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Well, we'll see. You know, we have a long history of not trusting politicians who have a tendency to co-opt the verbiage of movements. to their advantage to win elections. And hopefully this Los Angeles district attorney did not do that. And hopefully he will stick to his word about the things that he hopes to implement during his tenure as district attorney. But I want to thank you, Memo, for spending some time with us today and updating us on this terrible story that happened to Andrés Guardado and the insane direction that the investigation, and I guess I have to put investigation in air quotes, has taken. We've been joined today with Memo Torres. He's the director of partnerships at LA Taco. Memo is a taco eater extraordinaire and contributor to LA Taco, which is a Los Angeles-based publication that focuses on food culture and news. He has been following the murder of Andrés Guardado since June of 2020, when unfortunately the young man was shot and killed by Los Angeles sheriff's deputies. Memo, thank you. Thank you so much. We hope to have you on again to keep us updated. Hopefully this young man's family will get some justice and some cops will go the fuck to jail behind this. So thank you. Thank you, Memo.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, if you weren't convinced that the police need to be defunded after listening to the story there of Andrés Guardado, Seattle has something to tell you, okay? There has been development. And mind you guys, now we know that despite the fact that people have been out in the streets calling for defunding the police, there is a lot of resistance, not only politically, but by police themselves, which wield a lot of political power in a lot of these cities and towns in which all of us live. The city of Tampa, Florida, when proposed with cuts to the police department, the mayor and the city council said, no, we don't think that stands a chance of happening. Los Angeles actually has agreed to a small cut in defunding the police by only 5%. But Seattle has taken an extraordinary step with announcing, or by a recent vote by the Seattle City Council, that they intend to cut the funding of the police department by 20%. Which to a lot of people sounds like a big deal. But to many activists in any end, including people that actually live in Seattle, that's not a big enough cut. And right now we are joined with Seattle City Council person, Kshama Sawant. Kshama has spent, she's not a career politician. She is an activist with the Socialist Alternative and a rank and file member of the Teachers Union. Kshama has also won 3 elections despite big business and the Democratic Party opposition, and has helped win working class victories like the $15 an hour minimum wage and the Amazon tax on big business to fund affordable housing and the Green New Deal. We are very, very honored to be joined today with maybe one day Congressperson, but Councilperson Sawant joining us today from Seattle. Thank you so much for making some time today for us, Councilwoman. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
Okay, so when I read the story that broke at the end of November that the Seattle City Council had agreed to this 20% cut or voted on this 20% cut to police, I almost pooped my pants because, in the city, in area in which I live, Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland, 2 areas where the police get a gross amount of money and places that not only the police budgets have been increasing pretty much every year for maybe the past 20 or 30 years. If you told activists in Baltimore, Maryland that the police budget was going to get cut by 20%, they would dance a jig. But when I read that you voted against this because it didn't go far enough, I was actually very impressed. I'm like, you know what? I respect that. Talk to me about, number one, what the city council did, and tell me why you voted against it.
Thank you for that very important question. I think the events in Seattle have lessons in both directions. One, why we won some of the things we won in the wake of the Justice for George Floyd movement, and why didn't we win? Why didn't our movement win the things that the other things that we were fighting for? I think both sides contain extremely rich lessons for us to go forward with. And just to clarify at the very outset, I did not vote against the progressive amendments to the proposed budget from the mayor. I voted against the budget as a whole, the package. And this is my 7th year on the city council. I am the lone socialist. all the 8 council members, the other 8 council members are part of the Democratic establishment. And every year I have voted, when we vote on the budget, I have not only voted for, but using my office have built the People's Budget Movement to fight for and win historic amendments through the budget to go in a progressive direction. But I've always voted against the budget as a package. That is the vote you're talking about, which is not the vote just in the reductions of the police budget, but on the budget as a whole of the city. And the reason I've voted against it every year is that the budget, at the end of the day, all year, these Democratic Party politicians make promises after promises. But what really shows their commitment, it's the dollars on the table. And so in that sense, the budget of a city or a state or the federal budget is a moral document. And at the end of the day, this budget, unfortunately, this year again, especially in the context of COVID and the recession, is an austerity budget. Believe it or not, in this supposedly progressive city, these 8 Democratic council members approved a budget that cuts nearly $200 million in community services and in affordable housing. In community services, including bus hours that our most marginalized communities and essential workers rely on. That is what I voted against. And as far as what we won on the police budget, I think it's important to note that if you leave out the shifting of certain services like parking enforcement and 911 phone calls from the police department, the actual reduction in the police budget is less than 8% of the budget, which every dollar that we have succeeded in reducing in the police budget should absolutely be recognized as a victory of a very determined movement of tens of thousands of ordinary people in Seattle. But at the same time, we have to be sober and understand that at the peak of the Justice for George Floyd protests, where tens of millions of people were on the streets across America, including tens of thousands in Seattle, at the height of that movement, there was a real pressure on the Democratic establishment to make promises. We had many of these Latina council members that serve alongside me who voted for a racist police contract just 2 years ago, this year during the George Floyd protests, in tears, asking for the movement's forgiveness and saying they were going to do the right thing. They were going to defund the bloated police budget by at least 50% and really push for police accountability. But the moment the street heat declined, by the time it was October and November, all those promises, wafted into thin air. And at the end of the day, it was just my lone socialist council office that stood steadfastly with the movement, demanding a 50% defund, demanding that the city council not pass an austerity budget, which we know disproportionately hits communities of color, but as a whole, really is detrimental to working people as a whole. In the middle of this COVID, we are demanding that the bloated police budget should be reduced. And at the same time, we need an elected civilian oversight board with real powers of the police, a board that has the right to hire and fire police officers, subpoena police officers. By the way, these Democrats voted against that proposal from my office as well. So my point is that we should recognize all the victories we've won. Each and every one of them has come because we built a fighting movement. And what we didn't win, we need to build a fighting movement to win.
Thank you very much, Councilperson, for making that important distinction that you voted against the budget as a whole and not necessarily against the police cuts. But I mean, this has been a long time coming. And you said this year with the movement for Black Lives, with the protests about the murder of George Floyd, really being the catalyst to not only energize the people in the streets, but hopefully the politicians who are in positions of power to actually make decisions about that. And earlier this year, the African-American woman who was the police chief for the city of Seattle, Carmen Best, she resigned abruptly after the mere suggestion of cutting the Seattle police budget. I think she resigned only after the threat of $4 million being cut from the budget. I'm curious, what has been the response from police, from their unions or the organizations that represent the police? Are they mature? Are they handling this news about their budget going down in any way Are they handling it well, or are they perhaps making threats of labor shortages, of sick outs, something similar that we saw happen in Minneapolis after the uprisings there, where we saw a lot of police just flat out refuse to do their job out of protest of even the mere mention, the proposal, the suggestion of their budgets being cut. How have they been handling this news in Seattle?
There's no question that this police department in Seattle as a whole, and especially the Police Officers Guild, which is the supposed union that represents the police force. And I say supposed because I speak myself as a rank and file member of the local teachers union, and as somebody who has absolutely fought for labor rights and the rights of workers to unionize. But here, there's a problem here. In the labor movement, we have a saying that the labor movement really should live by, and it really comes down to the rich history of the courageous history of the labor movement was built on the adage that an injury to one is an injury to all. And if you put that front and center as the sort of the theme, the framework for building a strong labor movement, then you can see that a police department or a police officers guild that carries out violence, especially racist attacks against ordinary people, the brutal violence of chemical weapons against peaceful protests, that is not something that the labor movement can stand with. And so that is why I'm really proud of my fellow rank and file workers in the Martin Luther King County Labor Council, which is the local AFL-CIO organization, which voted in a majority to expel the Police Officers Guild from our labor council, because there's no room for this kind of attack on any workers. We need actually what we need is tremendous solidarity amongst the working class of all races, because we are all feeling the onslaught from the billionaire class who are continuing to profiteer during this pandemic, and the brunt of the recession and the healthcare crisis is being placed on the shoulders of working people. So by supporting a police officers guild that is carrying out racist violence, that's no basis for building a united labor movement. And that is why we took that step. And as far as the police chief, Carmen Best, is concerned, not only is it true what you just said, Kim, but she specifically resigned when the city council took up a proposal from my office and the People's Budget Movement in the summer, which was a proposal to limit the salaries of many of the executives in the police department. And many of them, believe it or not, had been making more than all the 50 governors in the United States of America. So they're making just completely out of this world salaries. And for what? With no accountability, with 29 community members having been killed at the hands of the police since 2011, and not one single police officer being indicted as a result of that. And so it's quite shameful that Carmen Best decided to resign in that context, when it came to her own salary, which even after the proposed cuts, they were very moderate cuts. Even after the proposed cuts, she was going to be one of the most highly paid executives, and certainly making, like tens of thousands of dollars more than ordinary workers in Seattle. And so it really shows how, as you were saying, that they have little to no commitment to our society. They claim that they serve society, but they don't. We know that the police force, the military, the National Security Agency, the Homeland Security, all these agencies are agencies that protect the powers of the capitalist state and do the bidding of the political establishment. And that's why at the same time that we put our spotlight on the police departments, which frankly include many, many reactionary components. And as you know, it's not a coincidence that the National Fraternal Order of the Police, which many of the police officers' guilds are affiliated to, have been enthusiastic Trump supporters. It's quite scary, actually. But in addition to putting a spotlight on these reactionary police departments, we also have to see the link. I mean, what is the role that they play for the capitalist state? They ultimately serve the interests of the establishment and the billionaire class. And if we don't explore that link, it will be hard for us to really think through this and understand how we can actually push back against police violence. And then the other point I think I'll make very quickly is that also note that Carmen Best herself is a Black American. And it really shows that at the end of the day, what our movements need is people who will stand with us and fight for us no matter what, regardless of their skin color. And we have to be aware of the dangers that the establishment, the way the establishment monopolizes identity politics to carry out the same kind of neoliberal attacks that they have been doing for the last 20, 30 years.
Well said, Congress. I keep calling you Congresswoman. I keep trying to put you in Congress, Councilwoman. My bad. But, there's a very famous Black American.
We certainly need these kind of politics in Congress.
Yes. We're going to have to make you in Congress and make you to the left of the squad, right? I think you could go in there and push the squad further left. And there's a very famous saying amongst Black Americans, not all skin folk are your kinfolk. And I think a lot of people of color, if they didn't already recognize that, from figureheads like Carmen Best, from figureheads like, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, from President Barack Obama, just because someone is the same race or skin color as you does not necessarily mean that y'all have the same class interests, that y'all have the same, budgetary ideas in ways that these public tax dollars can better suit the public at large. I wanted us to, if we could, Councilwoman, to take a look at some video from over the summer, because we know it got very contentious on the streets of Seattle with a full-fledged autonomous zone being created by the people that kept the police out, and that existed for a time, and then it went away. But the Seattle police absolutely made a case as to why they should be defunded by some of these actions. Dwayne, let's take a look at that, please.
Can I ask you if that is a Blue Lives Matter mask? It is. Police are sprinting. Police are sprinting.
And that was activists being sprayed with bear mace by police. And if we could run that second video, Dwayne, and let me preface it if I could. Over the summer, we know that there was construction taking place of a youth correctional facility, and activists said, nope, we think construction of this here project is over. Let's take a look at that. The site of a would-be youth correctional facility going up in flames as part of the uprisings that took place in Seattle over the summer. Councilwoman, I wanted to ask, first of all, what is the general sentiment amongst Seattle residents about defund the police? From what I understand, for the comment period that led up to the council voting on the budget, overwhelming majority of the people that were able to call and give comments wanted greater cuts than what was proposed by the council to the Seattle Police Department's budget. What are your constituents telling you about this?
I think that's a very important question. And I especially appreciate that, Kim, because as we draw up a balance sheet of our movements, victories, and analyze what we still haven't won, we have to take seriously how our demands connect to the broad majority of the working class. And so, as you correctly said, we had a huge support for the idea of defunding the police by at least 50% among what I would call the activist community, which is thousands of people, and those are the people who really fought hard. They made sacrifices in their personal lives to help build this movement, and the People's Budget movement had a tremendous momentum because of all these ordinary people pushing back against police brutality, and people of all races, sort of having a multiracial unity against racism and police violence that is specifically targeted at our Black and brown neighbors, but also broadly at protest movements. I mean, the video that you showed, the first video of the police brutally attacking peaceful protesters, I mean, we've had so much of that in Seattle. I mean, I personally and my staff and I, we were tear gassed when we were with protesters outside the what came to be known as a Capitol Hill organized protest. And so there has been a huge support. And I would say if you did a poll, you would find a strong majority of Seattle supporting an end to this kind of violence. And that is why one of the two key victories we won through the Black Lives Matter movement. And I would say both those key victories were won in Seattle for a reason, because not only we had a movement, we had the movement's voice through my council office. So it's no coincidence that both those victories were won here. And one of those victories was making Seattle the only city to have banned police use of chemical weapons. We would not have won that had there not been strong majority support against the use of these brutal weapons on peaceful protesters. We had ordinary people, hundreds. I've never seen this before. I've been on city council for 7 years, where people call in and say, I've never been political. I'm not even sure I want to call myself an activist. But you know what? I saw the police target people who were just standing there, just raising slogans, but nothing else, with no weapons, targeting them with tear gas and blast balls. And I am done with this kind of police violence. City council, what are you doing? You need to hold these police accountable, and ultimately it's at your doorstep, because the police serve at your behest. So there was that kind of clarity which really comes when movements are at the height. But at the same time, we have to understand that the idea of defunding the police is a complex one for people to understand. And so the way we, meaning Socialist Alternative and I and the People's Budget, the way we explained it to people made much more sense to ordinary people, Black and white and Latino, when we said that, look, defunding the police means reducing the budget of this already bloated police department, which is a $410 million police department, while the other departments like transportation, community services, parks, and affordable housing are being chopped. They're on the chopping block. Why should the police be given so much money and they use that money to inflict violence on ordinary people? We have all these bloated salaries. Don't you think that we should transfer some of this public revenue into actually serving the community in terms of housing and services and jobs? Because, statistics show that the best way to enhance public safety is to reduce inequality. Bloating the police department does nothing. And that's not my opinion as a socialist. That's what statistics show. And so when we explained it this way, there was much more support. But I think that's also it should be a sober moment of reflection for our movement, that at the same time that unfortunately some of the BLM leaders here in Seattle, while they fail to explain the defund demand in this way, in a way that will make sense to a lot of ordinary people, at the same time, they also did not actually fight in the way we would choose to fight. And we chose to fight for the defund demand itself, as we did till the very last second, because they ended up putting their faith in the Democratic establishment, and they ended up saying, well, we don't need this kind of fighting movement. We've got this. We can do this. Well, now what happened? All the Democrats have betrayed the movement in big ways. And as I said, it's not just about whether we got enough of a defund. It's also that in the middle of this recession, we have an austerity budget. And as the recession worsens, these austerity budgets are going to worsen. And for example, at the Washington state level, we are facing a $4.2 billion with a B, $billion public revenue shortfall for the next 2 years. That means massive amounts from already underfunded public education, public housing, public sector jobs. All of this is going to be cut. Who's going to face the brunt of it? It's going to be the working class and the poor. And no doubt Black and brown people will be disproportionately represented in it. So there's a real potential to build a fighting, united mass movement, including the labor movement, including community organizations, against austerity budgets, and also for an elected civilian oversight board with full powers over the police, which in our view has tremendous support. I mean, the idea of holding the police accountable actually with an independent board is so popular that I think that there is potential to fight for and win it next year. Unfortunately, the Democrats again betrayed on that as well this year. But this should be a lesson for us. Movements cannot put our faith in the Democratic establishment. When we win because we have built independent movements. And I'll just say the other victory that I feel that came, other big victory that came out of the Justice for George Floyd movement was the historic Amazon tax that our movement won here in Seattle at the height of the protests in the summer. And we would not have won it if it had not been for the Black Lives Matter protests. So the Amazon tax that we won, taxing the biggest corporations to fund affordable housing and the Green New Deal, is absolutely a victory for the socialist movement and for the Black Lives Matter movement.
Councilperson, you just let it fly right there. And you made so many salient points. And thank you very much for giving credit to the Black Lives Matter movement and those who advocate for the Green New Deal and the socialistic as well. We're running low on time, but I wanted to ask you, because I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I want to hear it from you anyway. I mean, you mentioned how the Democrats in Washington State, in Seattle, betrayed a lot of the work that the activists have been pushing for on a variety of policy issues. You know, when you hear Barack Obama say that defund the police is a snappy slogan, and you hear President-elect Joe Biden intend to take steps towards police reform, which includes giving the police more federal funding in the hopes that you can somehow train the racism out of them and the brutality out of them, which everyone who has been studying this issue for a long time agrees that police reform does not work. You cannot reform this type of racist, violent institution. Certainly can't reform them by giving them more money. The Democrats are going to end up very much on the wrong side of this defund the police movement. And I wanted to get your take on that. You know, when Joe Biden is elected by and large by people who were basically just trying to get rid of Donald Trump, not necessarily trying to make Joe Biden the president, and then to hear him really be to the right of someone like Barack Obama, what does this bode for activists and for this movement for the next 4 years?
I think that's a very, very important question for us, Kim, for our movements nationwide. And I think you said something really important in your previous interview where you said that so many of these Democratic Party politicians, they are so skilled at adopting the verbiage of the movement and then really co-opting the interests of the movement by ultimately betraying them. But, you know, so it's not like the relationship between mass movements and ordinary people in the Republican Party, where it's crystal clear these reactionary forces, right-wing forces, are not on our side and we have to absolutely defeat them. But what the Democratic establishment takes advantage of, and this is what liberal politics looks like, is they say some of the correct things, like, oh yes, we know we need to address police violence. We know we need to address homelessness. You know, you were previously talking about how homelessness exploded in the Los Angeles area. The same is true, unfortunately, for Seattle. And, you know, endless numbers of metropolitan areas, we're seeing the same phenomenon, rents skyrocketing and homelessness going up. Especially in Seattle, we've seen just a stunning increase in the evictions. And this was before the pandemic. Evictions that were especially hitting Black single mom households. It's completely unjust what is happening. At the same time, many of these Wall Street real estate companies, which own many of the buildings here in this city, have made profit hand over fist during the pandemic, when so many of us have lost our jobs and our incomes, and many of our loved ones to COVID. And so I think what we are going to see is at least a certain period of ordinary people feeling a sigh of relief, correctly so, because it is through their determination that Donald Trump was defeated. And Kim, you're absolutely right. The exit polls have shown that the vast majority of people who voted for Biden weren't voting for him. They were voting against Trump. And so while there will be a period where Biden will be able to sail on that whole sort of sigh of relief that people are feeling right now, at the same time, that won't last forever. In fact, already a poll is showing that 68% of ordinary people are saying in a poll that if Biden is appointing corporate type of people in his cabinet, then that's wrong and he needs to back off on that. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing somebody who is not Trump. Yes, Biden is not Trump. The Democratic establishment is not like the Republican Party. There are key differences. At the end of the day, though, there is one common thread running between those two establishment parties, is that they both loyally serve the same master, which is Wall Street, the billionaire class, and the capitalists. And so it's no surprise that many of the Biden cabinet picks are very much pro-corporate. You know, we saw Neera Tanden being appointed to the Office of Management and Budget. Again, you know, she's a South Asian woman, like South Asian American, like I am, but she is completely on the opposite end of the spectrum as far as which class she represents. I represent the working class. She represents Wall Street. She has a whole history of fighting against $15 an hour. We won the $15 an hour minimum wage here. And she also has a long history of standing with Biden in their attempted attacks on Social Security. And we also saw Biden appointing Cedric Richmond, this Black Congress member from Louisiana, who is has a long time sort of track record of taking money from fossil fuel lobby and also voting with Republicans against even moderate climate change related legislation. So we cannot put our faith in this administration, and we need to keep looking for opportunities to get organized independently of the administration. And the same thing is true for the police budget. You know, as you said, you don't reform a police department by giving them more money and say, here, there's more for you. Now do you have an incentive to change for the better? Of course not. They're not going to do that. So we're going to see on a whole host of issues, all the way from police violence and accountability to the Green New Deal, to the tsunami of evictions that is going to happen unless there is a real push to cancel rent and debt. On all of these issues, including the attacks on the public sector that will be coming, we're going to have to build independent mass movements all over the country.
Well, we are certainly grateful and impressed with the amount of work that you've been able to do while working on the Seattle City Council, you know, working with the teachers union and working with activists out there in the streets as a whole. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate you making some time and sharing your very valuable perspective with us. We need to have a whole discussion back with you about class warfare, basically, because, you know, we are headed into a direction that unfortunately we're going to have to start picking sides. And the Democrats are making it very clear that they are not on the side of working people. We hear these continued, questions from the Democrats about how they can reach to the center and bring in moderates. We don't give a shit about the moderates. You need to be reaching left and get these leftist people who are more than likely better to ride with your cause than people who perhaps voted for Obama and then turned around and voted for Trump. Like that's not who you should be getting. But that's a whole nother discussion. And I appreciate the time that you have spent with us today. We have been speaking with Seattle City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant. Councilwoman, thank you so much for your time and for your work, and great job for the people out there of Seattle that their budget for the police department has been cut at least some. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate you having me on and look forward to doing that again.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Hey, folks, it is 6:03. So that means the show is just about over. Just about, that is, because we've got some comments from the comments. So to the comments section. Doubt.com says, Kshama is spot on about that. Wow. Truth. Yes. I mean, y'all, you heard what she was saying about how activists in Seattle were betrayed by establishment Democrats. If that happened on the local level in a progressive place like Seattle, Washington, count on it happening from the Biden-Harris administration. Mickey Mallory says, it's sad that most Americans support the police union, but not unions in general. Dumb. Mickey, yes. There's been a lot of discussions on social media about the lack of political education amongst Americans as a whole. And this distinction that absolutely needs to be made between labor unions and the police union, they are not the same thing. And they are not for the same things, and they do not represent the same interests. Red is a friend of the show. Red says, body cams just record the brutality. They don't stop it. Not even close. Absolutely. I want to thank our first guest today, Memo Torres from LA Taco, for sharing his observations and his reporting about the ongoing investigation into the murder of Andrés Guardado in Compton, California. Folks, that is our show. We will see y'all Friday. I'm thinking yes. I'm thinking we could possibly see y'all Friday for another edition of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Please, pretty please, go to the Burn It Down with Kim Brown YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe for me. I don't even care if you like it. Subscribe, okay? We'll see y'all Friday. See y'all later. Bye-bye.